Importing food from as many different countries as possible for different kinds of products, and doing so could help reduce reliance. Food security is clearly a big part of national security, and governments are treating it as such.
Taiwan is a small island. We don't have a lot of farmland. So how to produce enough food to support the population is one of the major challenges.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya, Gopalan. Now, before you tuck into your next meal, take a good look at what's on your plate. Every ingredient has made a journey, most likely starting from a farmer's field, making its way to a shop, and finally to your table. And with around 1/4 of agricultural products moving across international borders, a good portion of what you eat came from another country. And with this in mind, we start our conversation on food security with our experts. Genevieve Donnellon-May, Research Associate at Asia Society Policy Institute, based in Melbourne. And here in Taipei, we're joined by Chang Hung-hao, Professor and Chair, Department of Agricultural Economics at the National Taiwan University. Thank you both so much for joining the program. I'm going to start with you, Genevieve, and ask you, in a nutshell, what is food security?
Well, I would say food security is about availability of food, so where it's available, the price of food, the accessibility, and it's looking really, you could say, at the who, where, what, how, and why. Who's able to buy it, when they're able to buy it, why they're able to buy it, and also how they're able to buy it.
Hung-hao, what would you say, if we bring it back to Taiwan here, is the biggest challenge that Taiwan faces when it comes to food security?
Yeah, because I think one of the major challenges will be by the nature of the nation. Because Taiwan is a small island, we don't have a lot of farmland. So how to produce enough food to support the population is one of the major challenges when we talk about the food security. Yeah, so that's why we need to rely on the import somehow to fit the population in Taiwan.
Right. I want to give a bigger picture look at global food security. And for that, let's get the perspective from Columbia University professor Glenn Denning. Now, he has over 4 decades of experience in international agricultural research and development. And his new book, Universal Food Security: How to End Hunger While Protecting the Planet, looks into transforming food systems for healthy diets while sustaining our environment. Here's his take.
So the reason I wrote the book was we're doing a terrible job in terms of achieving universal food security. The numbers basically speak for themselves. We have, latest count, 735 million people in the world going hungry every day, right? 735 million is the median estimate. That means basically they're energy deprived. There's probably 2 billion people or more, 2 billion or more, with various kinds of micronutrient deficiencies. There's 150 million children under the age of 5 years that are stunted. Stunted means their prospects of a healthy, productive life are minimal. 50 million children under the age of 5 are wasted, which means they're really at risk of death. And around 3 billion people in the world just simply don't have the money. They cannot afford a healthy diet. So all of those factors are critical. And by the way, at the other end of the scale, we have more than 2.5 billion people who are overweight and obese. 1/3 of them are obese, leading to all kinds of non-communicable diseases like diabetes and the like.
Some stark and critical figures there. Genevieve, how much has food security been impacted by the pandemic?
I think it's safe to say that a lot of the food security, both at a national level, at a regional level, and of course international level, has been significantly impacted by not only the pandemic and the implications of this when we've looked at, say, for instance, food supply chains as well. The way that when different ports were shut down, it meant that exports of food couldn't be sent around the world. So that's one point. I think following that, we've also seen the Ukraine-Russia war, and again, the implications of that for exports going around the world as well.
Right, we're going to get into that a little bit more later. But Hung-hao, let's bring it down to Taiwan and the impact of the pandemic here. Has that made much of a difference?
Yes, I think the major problem is the COVID-19 have changed the way people how to buy the food. For example, because of the quarantine policy in Taiwan, so people try to buy the food online. So we see a lot of evidence of that. So we just wondering after the COVID, if people will keep the online shopping or move to the traditional shopping in the store. Yeah, so I think the COVID-19 changed a lot of the shopping behavior in Taiwan, and that also will affect the food security.
And how would you say it affected the food security? Did it decrease or deteriorate the quality of food security here?
Yes, because when the professor from the U.S. just talked about the inequality. So when people try to shopping food online, they need to use the digital technology. So for the low income group or low social status group, the ability for them to use this digital technology is not as quite good as the other population. So I think that will affect the food security and also increase the social inequality somehow in terms of food consumption.
Right. I want to stay with Taiwan here. Now, in the aftermath of the 2007 and 2008 international food crisis, one might have expected island nations like Taiwan and Japan to enhance their food self-sufficiency efforts. However, recent statistics for Taiwan tell a very different story, and the findings are alarming. So, despite Taiwan's self-proclaimed status as the kingdom of fruit, the island's food self-sufficiency is on a downward spiral. Just 4 decades ago, Taiwan produced more than 50% of its own calories, but today it hovers around a concerning 30%, and the decline shows no signs of stopping. Hung-hao, I'm sure you're familiar with these figures. What happened?
Yeah, because you will see the food security the ratio decrease over time. It's because we changed the farmland use somehow. So we try to reduce the production back to like 20 years ago. Yeah, especially for the rice. So we have like a green payment for the farmland and so on and so forth, and also the land status sign program. So this will all reduce the production. So that's why we have the lower but the very stable food security index about like around 30%.
Genevieve, is this a pattern we're seeing across Asia?
Yes, I definitely think it is a pattern that we are seeing across Asia. Actually, in fact, there's just a few countries, including Australia, India, and Thailand. So it's really only 3 countries that are considered self-sufficient. And in the case of Australia, my home country, we know that it's one of the most food security countries. In contrast, we look at other countries in the region. We look at Singapore, for instance, and Singapore imports more than 90% of its local food consumption. So that's an enormous amount of food that not only does it import, but it also means that it's vulnerable to external events. So that could be something like an export ban, like what we're seeing in India at the moment, or when there were export bans in Central Asia also. But also Singapore and other countries like it are vulnerable to food price inflation and fluctuations as well. So I think Professor Chang's made a really good point here, as it's quite difficult for countries to not be so reliant on food imports when there may be challenges at home, such as in Singapore's case, the lack of land, the lack of water, that's needed in order to be able to increase agricultural production.
And one of the other challenges we're seeing, perhaps in many parts of Asia, but especially in Taiwan, is that young people no longer want to go into the agricultural industry or go into farming. And then on top of that, you have a declining birth rate and an aging population. Hung-hao, can you explain what that is doing to Taiwan's agricultural production and food security?
Yeah, the older age farm structure is a serious problem in Taiwan. Okay, because we expand the high-level education, for example, the college education back to like 15 years ago. So the acceptance rate for the college is reached to 90%. So this kind of higher education just encourage the young generation to move for the non-farm work. Okay, because the revenue for the farming income is always lower than the non-farm work. Okay, so that's why it make the entire farm population is pretty old. For example, the average age of the farmers in Taiwan is 62 years old. This is almost reached to the retirement age for other non-farm sectors. Yeah, so I think how to encourage the younger generation back to farming is also one of the major policy for the government in Taiwan.
Genevieve, how are other countries tackling this, or are they tackling this? When you look at countries like Japan, for instance, which has a very similar situation to Taiwan as far as the demographics.
Yeah, so it's really interesting question. And I think that what we're seeing in a number of countries, so not just Taiwan, but also in Japan, even Australia and other countries, is that they're having to rely more on agricultural technologies as well as biotechnologies. And so part of this could be looking at, for instance, all kinds of smart tractors and using drones as well. So rather than relying on people to work in the fields, people are now starting to look to technology to be able to help farmers with these kinds of issues.
And speaking of technology, Hung-hao, I believe that you have been part of the Agricultural Ministry's attempt at trying to solve maybe some of this problem with technology. Can you tell us about this app that's like a matchmaking for farmers and laborers?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting question, and I'm glad I have the opportunity to be part of the project. Okay, the project is try to borrow the digital technology, especially the matching platform, to solve the labor shortage problem. This is what government doing. They just create a digital platform. Okay, try to match the farms who need a farm worker, and on the other side of the platform, okay, for the people who want to involve in farming. So we have done this project for almost 4 years, and we observe the data over time. We see that the self-report labor shortage from the farm decrease over time. So I think the policy is working pretty well, and it's very effective. So yeah, but I have to say clearly. So this kind of digital platform only can solve the short-term labor shortage problem. Okay, in the long run, that's the structural problem. We probably need another solution.
Right, and we need solutions for so many things. And I think one of the big issues here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the issue of rice farming, which is incredibly labor intensive. And what we're seeing in particular in Asia, a region where 90% of the world's rice is produced and consumed, rice farming and the rice production has been decreasing. Genevieve, can you explain what kind of an impact this has, particularly with now government trying to stop the export of rice or certain staple foods to ensure that their country has it?
I think, again, this is an interesting question. And what we're seeing with India at the moment is that India's export ban on different types of rice is also having an impact on the kinds of rice that other countries are able to buy and the amount as well. So India, of course, is a major rice producer and an even bigger rice exporter. And so it really does seem that not only are the export bans, but then when we also look in the broader context of climate shocks, we look at the destruction that's been happening to agricultural production, particularly rice farming, such as in China. And we also look at continued conflict in other parts of the world, notably Ukraine-Russia war, as well as the competition for limited rice supplies and limited agricultural products means that it's really going to be quite a tough time for countries ahead, unfortunately.
Right, and something else that you'd mentioned earlier, Genevieve, and I want to go further into, is the Ukraine war, which has put a lot of pressure on agricultural supplies. So let's go back to Columbia University professor Glenn Denning to get a sense of the global impact of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Here's his perspective on the effect on food exports and related commodities.
The first of those impacts is that, Ukraine is a very significant exporter of food, and its exports have been disrupted now for more than a year, particularly wheat and corn and sunflower. The result of that are definitely higher prices. So that's number one, the disruption of food exports. Secondly, indirectly, because of sanctions, we see that fertilizer exports from Russia and Belarus have also been disrupted, leading to exceptionally high prices for these commodities. And that's important for food security because those higher prices limit the ability of countries to produce more in response to high food prices. So you've got those two things going on together. And the third thing that's important right now is that because of these higher prices, a number of countries are in the process of either reducing or halting their exports.
So Genevieve, what would you say is the biggest collateral damage we're seeing from the Ukraine war when it comes to food production or food security here in this part of the world?
If we look across the Asia Pacific, we can see soaring food price inflation in a number of countries. You know, we can look in Singapore, we can look in Bangladesh, and I'm sure that we could also look in Taiwan as well. And so that means for people who are considered to earn within lower incomes or even middle incomes as well, they are some of the most affected people by this. And so, of course, this also comes with the risk of malnutrition in the future as well, unfortunately, as it looks like that consumers will have to make difficult choices about what they can spend this month or this week on food and what they can't.
You know, one of the scenarios that the Ukraine-Russia war has made very apparent for Taiwan in particular is the fact that Taiwan could also be facing conflict, if not other forms of intimidation from its neighbor, China. Has Taiwan taken into account the possibility of perhaps a blockade by China where food cannot come into Taiwan, where the imports cannot come in and supplies cannot go out? And is Taiwan preparing for that as far as food security goes?
This is an interesting but big question, though. Yeah, because of the nature of the island. So if we get a lockdown from the food supply outside the island, the food security might be the big issue here. Yeah, but I just want to mention one thing that actually over the past few years, the government have a program we call the price support program. So government will use the guarantee price to buy the rice. So in other words, we have a lot of storage of the rice product in Taiwan. So I think it will help somehow to extend the period for the food supply. But we don't know exactly what the answer will be. Yeah, so I just hope we won't see that happening one day, because that would be a big challenge for island type of country like Taiwan.
Genevieve, I have another big picture question for you. Now, how has globalization eroded countries' urgency for food security? You know, now that we can import food, now that we can get foods all year round, despite seasons, despite times of the year. Has globalization undermined food security in any way?
Yes, that's a really good question. And my short answer would be to say that yes, I think it has, because maybe in not only the minds of governments or even policymakers, but also in consumers, we are able to go to the supermarket and say, well, if I want to buy some cheese from France tonight, I can. Whereas in the past, this wasn't possible. And so with governments looking at food security these days, I think that they are also having to consider the kinds of imports when it comes to food imports, as well as even pursuing what we may call a food diversification approach. So by that, I mean importing food from as many different countries as possible for different kinds of products, and doing so could help reduce reliance on not only one country, but also on one region as well. So that may be part of it. Another part of an answer to this question could be, well, maybe countries also need to consider improving or increasing agricultural production where possible at home.
Right, and with that, I take it to you, Hung-hao. What would your message be, given Taiwan's experience, about food security?
I think a country definitely have to keep a certain agriculture production by themselves, and also need to do the balance between the domestic production and the import. Yeah, I think this is the long-term plan, and they probably need a different strategy. Okay, for that, especially for the country like Taiwan. Okay, rely on the import and unstable the international situations. Yeah, so I think a different strategy on hand have do a good balance between the domestic production and the import will be the necessary thing to be considered to make sure we have a very reasonable food security ratio. Yeah, no matter now or in the future.
So, Genevieve, given what we've seen over the past few years, as he's mentioned with pandemic and then more reliance on imports, and those supply chain disruptions we were talking about, how much has food security moved up in the agenda of various governments, particularly in this region?
I think that it's safe to say that food security has really moved up on the policy agenda for all governments across the Asia Pacific. If we look to the Philippines, for instance, we can see that President Marcos Jr., he has also made himself the agricultural minister in a show of how important not only agricultural production in the Philippines is, but also how important food security for the Philippines is. Similarly, we can see in Indonesia and other countries like Indonesia that they are also trying to increase their stockpiles or their national reserves. Food security is clearly a big part of national security, and governments are treating it as such.
Well, here in Taiwan, amongst other things, the country is home to the World Vegetable Center, which holds the largest public collection of vegetable genetic material, or germplasm, on the planet. Our team went to their site in Tainan to find out how researchers are working to make the food we grow more resilient to climate change and preserve biodiversity.
Have you ever eaten white eggplants or oblong-shaped tomatoes? These strangely shaped vegetables may look surreal, but are organically grown at the World Vegetable Center in Taiwan. The global institution has been working with top agricultural researchers and scientists across the globe. Their aim is to enhance biodiversity in single-species crops while also making them more resilient to extreme weather caused by climate change.
育种的工作事实上会让我们的整个植株整个品系会更适应这么热的天气。
These experimental fields across the center grow popular vegetables like peppers and tomatoes. It's also a place for visiting international scholars to study new varieties.
This is tomato yellow leaf curl virus. This is the most common virus in Taiwan, and this is how it's influenced tomato. 100% of total loss of the field. If you will have full field like this, you will not earn any money.
Tomato yellow leaf curl virus, or TYLCV, and can have a devastating impact on the plant, leading to severe economic losses.
One of the most important research that have been done in the World Veg is to establish and to do a pyramiding, to combine together something like 6 different genes or markers contain resistant to TYLCV, tomato yellow leaf curl virus.
The center's gene bank houses over 65,000 plant samples from Taiwan and around the world.
What's also important is that this seed bank is an international seed bank. So also breeders and researchers, and actually farmers also, worldwide they are requesting seed. And we are also collaborating with gene banks all around the world to support each other.
But along with support, safeguarding samples is also critical. Ukraine's seed bank, which held the nation's genetic biodiversity, was bombed by the Russians during the ongoing war.
The
Russia-Ukraine war prompted the World Vegetable Center to send over 8,550 seed samples to Norway's Svalbard Global Seed Vault, also known as the Doomsday Vault.
如果未来这边发生了任何的状况，不只是战争，有可能是天灾，有可能是火灾，那我们都还有机会从末日地窖把这些种人救回来。
So far, the World Vegetable Center has backed up nearly 75% of its collection in the Doomsday Vault, and it hopes to hit 100% by 2025.
但是台湾政府并没有相关的法规授权，让任何的地方政府或是中央机关来签署相关的授权书，以至于我们在台湾当地收集种源的时候，我们没办法在未来合乎国际规范的前提来利用这些种源。那这个其实对于台湾自己本身是不利的。
The Gene Bank's manager believes that the organization's contribution to agriculture is crucial for Taiwan's food security.
Through this gene bank, Taiwan breeders and researchers not only access seed from this gene bank, but also can connect to a larger network of seed banks all around the world. Having that kind of international collaborations on food security and food nutrition is really important.
This year, the All Vegetable Center celebrates its 50th anniversary. And with climate change, global warming, and the possibility of conflict, researchers here hope the center can create a pathway for future food security. With Swing Lin and Jasmine Lin, Shubhampal for Connected.
And with that, we say a huge thank you to our guests, Genevieve Donnellon-May, Research Associate at Asia Society Policy Institute, who's speaking to us from Melbourne. And a huge thank you to Chang Hung-hao, Professor and Chair, Department of Agricultural Economics at National Taiwan University, speaking to us from here in Taipei. And to end as we started, the next time you sit down to have a bite, have a look at what's on your plate, with the thought that what you choose to eat matters well beyond your personal diet. It's been great to have your company. Thank you, and remember, stay connected.